There you are, Gil. How are ya?
Fine, how are you?
I am good. Everyone's coming on over from fellowship time. I never know who to assign as the next host when I'm leaving. It's like, who's going to stick around on this side? I usually hand it over to the Wolves.
Okay.
That's a deep sigh, Gil. How are you?
I'm okay. We got our first COVID shot yesterday.
Yay. How do you feel about that?
Fine. I'm a little sore,
Yeah.
headachy, but otherwise okay.
Okay.
Good.
I'm hoping
I'm thankful, very thankful to have it. It took longer than we expected. I mean, we thought we'd get it sooner.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get mine maybe this week, maybe next week. I'm now in the classification of a teacher, so
Good.
An educator. All the preschool staff this last week went and got their first shot.
Terrific.
But the second shot for them, because they got it, Thursday, Friday, Saturday this last week, their second shot is due right around Holy Week. And it got me thinking, because they said, come with us, Pastor. And I was like, oh, but I can't be sick during Holy Week.
And the second shot is the one. Second one's the one that might get you sick.
Right. For a while. So I'll postpone that first shot just a little bit, and the second shot will be after Easter if I can get in. We'll see.
And how's your vertigo and nausea stuff and everything? Is it better? Yes,
every day gets better. The nausea's for the most part fairly gone. It's just still the wobbles. I can walk. Put me on a straight path and I'm golden. Just don't ask me to do a whole bunch of short turns and turn it around.
Okay.
The wobbles and the imbalance is still definitely there. But
oh wow.
Well, Paul and Regina got to see me walking around yesterday. Not too bad.
Sorry to miss that. Still trying to keep away from congregate things, so we didn't go, but we were there in spirit.
Can you hear us?
Yep, we can hear you. Yay! You figured it out. What was it?
We had to go totally off the computer and come back on. Don't know.
Reboot. Like every other computer problem, reboot and it solves most of them.
If all else fails, turn it on, turn it off.
Yeah. I wish that would work for us.
Isn't that what daylight savings is, though? A reboot?
Yeah, yeah, maybe so.
I see Kevin coming in, Co's coming in. Everybody's got their book ready to go. Paul's ready to go.
Except he's on mute.
Yeah, Paul's on mute.
He's talking a lot.
Paul, you're on mute.
How's that?
That's better, I think.
I thought you guys could read lips. I don't know.
Not that good. Well, shall I hit the record button and shall we begin? Paul, are you ready to lead?
I'm ready.
All right, let me go ahead.
I think you're already recording.
Oh, somebody has hit recording.
Oh, okay.
Somebody did. Cool.
Okay. Well, the last two Sundays we were talking about the nature of justice and what compassion means and how they interrelate. And we're focusing on the verses in Micah 6:8, right? What does God require of you but to, I'm going to just my translation, to do justice, to love, to practice loving kindness, and to walk in solidarity of community with God. Now, that's a literal translation as you can get of these verses as far as I know. And so we've talked about justice, we've talked about compassion, and we've talked a little bit about how they interrelate. The idea is you can't have one without the other. They're interdependent. But the context of this interdependency is community. So where have you experienced community? Where you know justice and compassion is present and at work in a communal setting. Do you have any examples of that from your own experiences?
Well, I can think of one. The thing yesterday certainly was a the mosque groundbreaking. Yeah.
Now, why was that a communal thing, and why did you see justice and compassion there?
Well, we had to overcome a lot of things, which I would call justice, and certainly the spirit of which these people have kept going through all this process.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our church provided a hospitable community for them to work, and they were treated with justice from our side, and they returned it. And that groundbreaking yesterday brought people there that I didn't recognize to this, so that you could just see a community that's inclusive and expanding. It's not just Muslim, it's also Christian. It's also people who don't care about Christian. They're just expanding the notion. And it's all because of justice and compassionate relationships.
I think one of the most important things Riyadh said yesterday, and it was kind of just a comment, kind of an offhand comment, was that this mosque is for the community. It's for everyone, and it's open to everyone. It's not a closed community. And that's really important.
But now I'm talking too much again. So where have you experienced real community based on solid justice and compassion? Where have you ever seen that?
I'm struggling a little bit because I mean, the example you gave is great. It did take place over time. It still hasn't come to full fruition, and hopefully it will with the mosque. When I'm thinking of the question, I'm not thinking of a particular event. I'm thinking of a sequence of events or a life experience, and that's where I'm struggling. The closest I can come right now would be my last congregation, St. Timothy's Episcopal in Danville, California, where there were just some incredibly compassionate, fair people. The church stood out in the community as basically totally open and totally involved in social issues. And that extended in general, not perfectly, to the congregation and how it treated the members. There were conflicts, there always are, a lot of politics. It's a big congregation. But I thought that was probably the place where I experienced the most of it.
Anybody else?
I also think the church is probably truly the only place I've experienced compassion and non-judgmental. Oh, I think the church, they just,
were you asking me or were you asking me or Co?
No, I'm just telling you, I also think that the church, this church, I mean, I speak for myself. I thought Trinity was wonderful until we hit the political field. And I find that this church isn't quite as bad. Let's put it
quite as bad, that's an interesting term. Okay. Co, I don't know if you know that you're muted. I hear Co and Janet.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, you do know you're muted. Okay.
I see the sign language. So.
Yeah, I noticed. I thought you were trying to say something. That's all.
So any other observations?
I have
Kevin,
one
what do
quick
you think?
observation, real quick. This is, I think my impression of our congregation will change over time once we get back to a more normal situation. Like when we had the drive-in service last, I saw Co and Janet, and because I have never seen them in person, really, I didn't quite know if it was Co and Janet. I just want to say that. I think, you know, the masks really create a situation, this virtual meeting stuff. Yeah. I think our community will become a wonderful community of faith and justice and so on once we come back to some normalcy.
Well, I think it already is. Otherwise, you wouldn't have people coming back in the cars.
Well, I'm talking about, I think of long-term experiences were new.
Kevin, I saw you say something.
Sorry.
Kevin, as a Presbyterian Lutheran.
You know, in the 70s and early 80s, I worked with a number of people in anti-poverty programs. And I found those people to be remarkably interested in justice and remarkably unconcerned about the things that divide us, but very interested in how we could work for justice in society and to empower people, and to allow people to make those empowering decisions for themselves. And so in my work with Head Start, in my work with the community action movement, I met a lot of people in those communities who were very much communities of justice, and definitely moving from the bottom up in making those, in leading them, and I found that, and later I worked for a national committee on self-development of people. And I was able to work with groups around the country who were locally identified, groups of people who had identified ways to work for justice in their own community. And these were people who were low income and who were marginalized in one or more ways, who had sought to seek justice and enable others in their community, and were working for justice in their community. And I was privileged to work with those folks to help them to be more equipped to be effective in their community, as I served on that board. And I saw a number of these groups around the country who were working for justice in their communities in a variety of ways to bring water or to seek justice for racial and ethnic minorities, or to find religious freedom for folks who had found themselves to be marginalized on the edge of their religious group, in a variety of different ways. And I found that to be a very empowering thing, to just be a part of working with these folks who from the bottom down had decided to set themselves free and to set others free in the process. And that was those were wonderful communities to be invited to be a part of and to help equip. So those were all communities that I have cherished being a part of.
Thank you, Kevin. I think of one now as you speak about that. Some of you have been to Holden Village, and there's this place where no matter what part of life you are in, from what segment of life you are coming, you are a piece of something bigger there, and you find a place of welcome there. And there's always the phrase of, you determine how much engagement you do while you're at Holden. You can take every class, you can every conversation, you can be in the craft cave, or you can just simply sit on the grass and read a book. And that's okay too, that there is space made for everybody in that place. And at the same time, while you're there, you're always part of a system that is ecologically being good stewards of what is surrounding you, from the food prep and collection to the disposal of it, the water treatment that's taking place. So there's an environmental justice that takes place there, but the offerings there and the relationships you build there last beyond your time there, usually.
Just Holden was one of the places I thought of too, and I've often thought about that experience. I've lost the word. What's the word when you go on a long walk to a holy site? A pilgrimage. Pilgrimage. So I've often thought of the journey to Holden as kind of a pilgrimage. It's a separation. And it seems like once you're there, you're in a place of a safe place, a place of vulnerability. It's really a place apart where
no phones, no
emails. You're right. You can experience things
and
maybe go more deeply into who you are and what God's doing than you do in other settings. It's pretty amazing.
And I always wonder about that, is what is the uniqueness of Holden that allows for that fully presence, that the vulnerability, the attitude of looking at oneself and our place in the world and our call into the world, because no one can ever live at Holden forever. You are always sent back out. Even those who work there can't stay there forever. How does the church itself practice that? How do we as a community of faith do a vulnerable welcome and have a flavor of that? I think every church should, every faith community should. And Holden lives it to a whole other level that it just is awe-inspiring.
Yeah, I thought also of my camping experience. We were in a camp 7,000 feet up Mount San Gorgonio in California with 16 miles of dirt road to get into it. Now that's not anything like going to Holden. I understand, I've never been to Holden. But you're just totally separated. We were dependent on a couple of generators, and when they went off at night, it was pitch black, and you were all alone. And but the community of that permanent staff that we were part of was very tight and very functional, and certainly provided an important process for the young people that came up there.
In fact, I met Gina at a Lutheran church camp.
Is Holden something one can register for almost any time of the year, or is it
yes,
certain?
It's year round, and I did see them just post asking for volunteers for this summer, which means it appears that they will be open this summer. I've been up there all times of the year, from February to the summer. I've hiked in there. I've been up there at winter with my own family for Christmas, the fall with youth. It's gorgeous any time of the year. There's no bad time.
I was just going to say really quickly, I've stayed at a Franciscan retreat about 3 different times in California, San Damiano, near a beautiful mountain setting, and there you sense the commitment to justice, totally, and compassion and inclusion. Very powerful moments.
Why is that? Is it because we've separated ourselves from the world to finally listen and hear, and we don't have distractions? Why can we not have that same experience at home in our current context? I mean.
Well, we just have to make it happen. I mean, we have to set aside the time and the place and turn off the electronics.
Put these away.
Yeah.
We did yesterday with our Muslims friends.
Yeah.
Right?
I think part of it is safety also. I feel like when I'm at a place like San Damiano, and I'm sure it's true at Holden, I feel safe. I feel an inherent trust for the other individuals around me. And I don't always feel that in the community. I'm not talking about our congregation, I'm just talking about the community.
But even as, you know, we heard in the sermon today from Deacon Diana, some people don't feel safe in
Correct.
faith communities. How do we encourage that vulnerability on our sides to sort of just tip our cup and say, we're not perfect, see our faults, here's who we are, love us as we are, and we'll love you as you are. Yeah, how do we do that? Because there is that sense of, I have to put on a certain face and hold it together. But when you're at Holden or you're at a retreat, it's just like, I can just be.
Yes.
Isn't that what church should be, though? All the time.
Yes.
Part of that is to be honest about our own brokenness and our own vulnerabilities. I remember that when I worked at Head Start, I went to the first time I went to a Head Start state gathering with the leader of our parents association. And it was interesting to me because I had never been to a hotel with a meeting where you stayed overnight at a meeting before in my life. This was a new experience for me. And I was going as the Head Start director, but she, as the leader of the parent group, had been twice before as the vice president of the leader group the previous year. And so she could guide me through the process of registering at the hotel and registering at the convention. And, you know, and it was a wonderful thing for her to be able to come back and tell at the next leadership gathering that we all have things to teach one another, and to use that as an illustration. So being honest about our vulnerabilities allowed this connection between us, that even the director of the program has things to learn from the parents. And it was a valuable teaching moment that preserved the relationship through the entire time I was there, even as the parents changed. About me. We have to be honest about who we are, our brokenness and our vulnerabilities. And
he froze.
But along the lines of what Kevin's saying, I think fits with the book of this arrogance of sin that you write about here, this idea of too often we don't want to tip our cup and show our vulnerability, show our brokenness, and it's more of an arrogance or a pride maybe that's holding us in a place that is not open. And then when we're not open, we're not only not open to the other, we're not open to the Spirit either.
So it sounds, what I'm hearing here, it sounds like you're saying in your own ways that justice is a process and compassion is a process.
Yes.
It's not something that's ever finished. It's something you always are involved in, and compassion always leads to some kind of just action. You can't be just without compassion, or compassionate without justice. And And in the biblical tradition, that interdependence and the establishment of that kind of community requires God to be part of it. Right? The last word I translated there doesn't mean just simply walk humbly with God. It means live in compassionate justice, a just compassionate society with God. So God's, according to Micah, God's always part of the process. So justice and compassion are a process. They're not a static state that we experience. Is that fair?
Yes.
I think that
sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Gil.
Go ahead, Laura, please.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a different experience, I think, in some ways with the whole idea of making ourselves vulnerable and showing our brokenness that I just like to share that makes me vulnerable. But I think a lot of people, when they see me, they assume or they see, quote unquote, my brokenness because I'm rolling around, you know, and so people make assumptions about me being weaker or sicker or more limited. I've had people ask if they can heal me, if they can pray for me. I think that's all. Sure, why the more the better, right? But I think that it's well, there's two things I want to say about it. On the one hand, it gives me really deep compassion for people who look just totally fine on the outside. Like they're walking and they're not using a wheelchair, but they really had trouble getting up that morning. It was really difficult and depressing and anxious. And in a way, it's easier for me because it's just like right there and people are being kind and sensitive. And maybe they're not when it's invisible. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, what I want to say to people is, you're making some wrong assumptions because my real brokenness is not that I have trouble walking. You know, my real brokenness is that I might have trouble spiritually or with ego or with feelings of not being good enough, or just the things that you can't see are where my real brokenness is, not what you're assuming it is. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Gil. Zoom is tricky.
Really important.
Zoom is tricky. So now I defer to you.
Okay. I was just going to say that, you know, like with justice, when I think I'm doing justice in somebody else's eyes, I'm not. And it takes a great deal of courage and strength to follow a path of justice that you think is based on your relationship with the spirit you believe is true. For instance, even a simple thing like helping other people who are homeless or at the poverty level can be objectionable to other people who maintain they need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Mm-hmm. And our society is sort of paralyzed right now with this kind of attitude. Mm-hmm. I know, and I believe, and I am true to my belief that helping them is necessary and true, and finding out how to support them by talking with them about their needs is critical. But again, others would not see that as justice. They see it as foolishness. There's no easy solution. We just have to be true to our belief.
Yeah, Joan Smith and Jenny Etner and I, when we were walking back with Co and Janet from the mosque groundbreaking yesterday, we're talking about this idea of vulnerability is based in relationships of when someone's speaking and they don't realize how offensive their language is, either racially, culturally, you know, one of those things I keep trying to correct myself is we use that phrase homeless, but it doesn't mean in a tent. It's food insecurity or shelter insecurity, and to not do the less, but because it does degrade a person to hear, oh, you're homeless or you're foodless, right? And so our wording, but even with Rachel things, right? But when you have a good relationship with somebody and you've spoken your mind, shall you say, they're hopefully in a place in a good relationship where they can say, hey, you know, I hear what you're saying right now. However, that word, that phrase you just used, I find really offensive. And that's the only way we're going to grow, because our arrogance is we know what we need to do and how we're going to help. And it takes a lot for another person to correct us and for us to receive that critique with a welcome heart and go, oh, I never knew that was an offensive phrase to you and maybe to others even. And to just recheck ourselves, because we're always growing, right? We're always hopefully growing and learning. Yeah.
What helps me with language is to always think of the person. So instead of the disabled, to say the person with a disability, or the person who is differently able, or the person who is unsheltered, and or the person who is, you know, and just that rule of thumb makes the language like, what is it this year? You know, is it disabled? Is it handicapped? Is it sheltered? Is it, you know, just that rule of thumb, just saying the person and helps. It's just a little something that's helped me.
The concept of microaggression, though, is troublesome at times, because so inadvertently we can become microaggressive. And so many people react now by saying it's a minefield, I'm not going to engage. And that gets in the way of justice and compassion as well, when we have to be so careful.
And yet, you know, as Paul and Rick write in their book about liberation theology, this idea of that compassion and justice comes from the lens. Sometimes we have to look through the lens of those who are on the margins of society, that so often we, like Laura says, want to generalize the disabled, the homeless, not make it a person and about an individual and about a relationship with that individual. Yeah.
Agree.
I appreciate what Gil was saying about the sometimes desire, the fear, I'm not going to engage because I might do something wrong. And I think that's part of the importance of vulnerability and humility, as the book talks about, of being willing to make a mistake and be corrected, to give up our place of always having to be right, and be able to step out knowing we might make a mistake and, you know, asking that we be corrected if we do. That's big vulnerability.
How many of you like to be critiqued and corrected? Raise your hand.
It's only when my wife does it, because she does it with such compassion.
There you go.
And my wife's always right, so, you know.
Wise.
But you know, it's an adventure of a sort, trying to live a just, compassionate life. It's kind of an adventure, and you're going to make mistakes. But the question is, should the mistakes stop you from trying?
A lot of people will be stopped, unfortunately. That's the issue. They're not willing to.
I know. So you have to trust something that transcends your actions and mistakes. And in our community, that's called God. That somehow faith leads a certain kind of lifestyle. And it means working for, you know, historical Jesus becomes the model for what that means. That's why we have stories about him. We have the 7th, 8th, and 6th century prophets, and they tell us what it is about. Sometimes in very stark, words like Amos, who says, God says, I hate your feast, I hate your festivals, just do justice. Walk compassionately, that's all you need to do. And it's really that simple. It's all we need to do, but it's also very difficult at times. I've been involved in situations where it was quite dangerous to be just, especially in the early civil rights things. I remember a year before I met Gina, what was her name? A black, he was shot and killed. Medgar Evers's wife was coming to Claremont to finish up a master's degree. And the realtors in Claremont got together and redlined her out of any possibility of getting a place to live.
She wanted a place for her and her kids.
She wanted a place for her and her kids, near school, all that stuff. So the people at School of Theology found out about it, and we found out who the realtor was, and we picketed him. Okay? Got out there and said, this guy, and there must be 20, 30 of us out there every day for a week. And one day I'm out there with them, and I see this car slowly turn the corner and something sticking out the window. And I said, everybody drop, and they did. And the young woman who was standing next to me had her hand up, got hit with some buckshot in her hand.
Oh dear.
Okay. It didn't stop us. We were back the next day, and one of my friends wrote the license number of the car down as it sped away. So they got them, and they were arrested, and the realtor that hired him was arrested, and each of them got 20 years in the California penal system. Now, that's justice for them as well, but the compassion there for Medgar Evers's wife was what motivated us to act justly. Now, we were young and dumb, and I was, 22, and didn't know a lot about the world, even though I thought I did. But I knew that's something we had to do. And some of our faculty members joined us. So that was a clue. Now, we did something based on compassionate justice, as I look back on it, but it's not a process that's ever finished. Look at the world. And yet Christians are called upon to do that sort of thing. I can think of the underground church that fought off Adolf Hitler. I think of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a theologian who stood against Hitler and got executed, 3 days before Allied troops arrived in Berlin.
Liberation theology.
Well, the liberation theologians as well. There have been a lot of people killed for being Christians.
Yeah, but
there are a lot of people killed for being Jews.
Yes.
There's also a challenge, if I may. Sorry.
Go ahead.
There's also a challenge. I was involved in a lot of civil rights activity as well back in the 60s. I think that was part of our generation. And the problem was, and I wasn't a fully formed Christian then. I was a person of faith, but I was still searching. But one of the things I noticed is the secular community and the religious community were fighting for some of the same things, but how they went about it were very different. And times that was extremely troublesome and challenging. It's just a thought. And we sometimes, as Christians, need to reach out to the secular community as well and work with them. That's all. I don't know what, it just came to me that we live in a bigger world than our faith community, and we still need to navigate that world and bring other souls to a place where they're comfortable fighting for justice.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that last part there, that when you start working with the secular community, you do not know how they are going to respond. And some of them may very well find their way into the church or
some healing. They've been harmed by the church in the past, things like that.
Yes.
Yeah. But when you're thinking of justice, you don't worry about a person's identity as Christian.
That's not the goal.
That's not the goal. You worry about the fact that there's a need here, and that need has to be taken care of in a just way. And what motivates you to do that is a feeling of connection, interdependence. Okay, that person's pain is my own, and that person's joy is my own, and we act accordingly, and that action accordingly is called justice. That's what Micah's talking about.
Correct. And Micah was talking to a community. I guess what I wasn't saying very well, and I don't want to dwell on this, is very simply that some people see ways of seeking justice or resolving issues around justice in ways that are different than a Christian would follow. Some political activities within the groups I've worked within were very disturbing and very unjust to achieve justice. That was, I'm sorry you even brought that up, but
it's a fascinating thought though, because like yesterday on the drive into Mukilteo for the mosque groundbreaking, NPR had a fantastic conversation interviewing an author that I can't remember the name of the author. The name of the book is Change. And why is it that certain things, and they use the civil rights as an example. Rosa Parks is known, right? Worldly known for her not giving up her seat. However, why did the change take root then when the exact same thing had been taking place even months earlier, and those individuals never got the name or the forefront? There's something, and so the work in this book that the author does is sort of like these mass spreaders, not so much a virus, but the same idea, this mass spreading of why does something latch and take root and mass spread at a certain time and not at others? Is it because there's a spirit in the world at that time, both secular, sacred, whatever you want to call it, that says, yes, justice is now. And yet, unfortunately, we reminisce about the civil rights movement. And now this generation, the same thing, Black Lives Matter is exactly what that civil rights movement was. It's a continuation. Why do things not take root to the effect that we want them to, that we feel they need to?
Yeah.
Kurt, I see your hand up.
There we are. One of the things that I'm hearing is, everybody's talking about a class of justice, a class of things. But individuals act also that are effective in doing this.
Right.
It was a simple thing. We lived in a very rural area, and you never passed a car that was broke down. You just didn't. Of course, now maybe it's not safe, but one of the things that, my philosophy has always been give now, and then people ask, well, gee, what can I do? Can I pay or whatever? And the answer is no, just pass it on. Next time somebody else needs help, do it. And one of the things that, talking about social justice, we were coming back traveling from, I believe there's one of the fruit stands just by Ellensburg, and the parking lot was absolutely full. There was a person trying to change a tire on a trailer that had a load full of pigs. It was odorous. The people were Chicanos. Nobody walked over to help them. I happened, and of course, one part of it is if you're in a car, you probably don't have anything to help them with. But nobody was over there by them. We happened to stop. I had my truck and, and I was able to help him change the tire and get him on his way back to Seattle. He was just, but what I'm trying to say is when you see that, individuals can act and defy the injustice of right. And you know, the gentleman had a old trailer and an old pickup, and he was Chicano. You know, you could see, to me, you could see all the check marks, and it just, I'm not trying to put myself up, but nobody else was doing it. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, justice and compassion can be an individual thing as well, just like something like that. Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to point out.
And I think that's
exactly right.
We try to, you know, we try to teach our kids that too, that if you see a person at school being bullied, stand up and speak, right? That's an individual thing, but it's a risk, right? It's a vulnerable risk to place yourself in a place of, do I help the person? What is going to be the backlash? What is the risk? Some people make that assessment and say, it's not worth it. Some, like you, Kurt, will say, of course, I'm going to do this, because if I was in that place, I would want someone to help me. So it's not about, will I be hurt? It's more of, if I was in that place, I would want the same. And that's where that golden rule comes in, right? So
I think that goes into the whole concept of I don't know how to, like, silent ministry, because there's so many aspects to reaching out, and part of it is packing bags or setting up tables, setting up chairs, having aisles wide enough, having doors wide enough. There's all these ministers I can think of at Point of Grace and other places that do the silent, often unrecognized, thankless work. And without them, there would be no justice. They're the underpinning of all the wonderful things that happen, that are more visible.
amen to that.
And I like Kurt, you know, when you stopped for that person, what really resonated to me with your story is that it felt like it was just really natural for you. Like it's just part of who you are to stop and do that. It wasn't for some quote cause or because someone told you to. It was just a natural outgrowth of your heart and of what you believe. And that story really touched me.
Right. It also absolutely is a real gift to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But the other side of it again is justice and compassion. Is we live in these large communities where we barely know anyone, and at the time of Micah and others, people tended to live in very small communities and live their lives pretty much together. There wasn't the transience we now have. So as Christians, part of the challenge is to have faith and trust in the Spirit, to have faith and trust in others, in spite of the fact we have no idea who they are when they need help. And that is a gift that is faith, that is walking in faith.
That's that trust, yeah.
Yes.
My experience of Mukilteo is it's a very small town. So
okay.
I don't think I would do this anyway, but I'm super careful about what I say to anyone about anyone.
It's a small town.
Yeah.
I saw you chew out a police officer once.
Yeah, exactly. With your backing and support, Paul. Thank you.
I mean, she went after this guy because he wanted to. He was giving one of our youth a hard time. Not a member of our church, but during
teen lounge.
And this young woman had apparently skipped school, you know, but this young woman stood up for her and talked like a lawyer. I've never seen her do that before.
It helped that
She put this guy on trial.
It helped that Paul came out because they tended to listen to a articulate white male more than me. I think what got me fired up was this young woman was Black.
Yeah.
And her mother had called the police. I found out later and said, I think my child is missing, but you might want to check first at the church.
Yeah, that was a long day that day.
and not just a backup car, which I get, but 3 police cars arrived at the church parking lot with the preschool still in session, with their sirens on and their lights blazing.
Yeah, it was very inappropriate.
We felt it was a little bit of over, and again, it was great.
So here's Laura facing off 3 police cars.
Yeah.
Don't mess with Laura.
And Kim Kuzelik came out and the kids were scared. And then I was concerned that it would change the teen lounge into not a safe place, because even if this young woman did have a warrant and maybe the police were completely justified to be there, I don't want to say that they weren't. Then word gets around with those kids and they're like, okay, don't go to the lounge because the police are going to show up. So what was really wonderful about that experience is the follow-up, because I took someone else with me, actually Joyce Lasserer. And we met with Myron Travis up at the Starbucks. And we just said, we don't know the other side. Maybe she had drugs. Maybe she had a warrant. It's, maybe your people were justified, but the process of it, explain to me why we needed the sirens and how can we do it? How can we do this differently going forward? Can we go inside, sit in a conference room? And it was a beautiful conversation. And after that, what grew out of that was Myron committed to coming to the lounge once a month. He came that following week. He brought bracelets for all the kids. He talked about growing up in Detroit, how the police changed his life for the good. And he became one of our strongest. Out of that unfortunate experience, he became one of our strongest supporters.
Yeah, he was quite a guy.
Yeah, and he is. Kids, I know David really
liked him. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So one person can make a change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One person can make a change.
Laura did it.
No,
Paul,
you came out though, and you were great. You were kind of the voice of reason, and the thing that I thought was a little bit sad about the whole thing, that I wish we had been able to connect with the mother, because I felt that she was obviously like crying out for help, right, with her daughter. And we never really were able to make that bridge, which would have been really important, I think.
Nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
When you're struggling for justice and compassion, there are always loose ends.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed that?
Do you think
are you having a storm down at your house, Cole?
Do you think that would have happened if she was a white girl in a nice outfit?
Oh yeah, right.
Unfortunately, probably not.
Mm-hmm.
I was asking if Co had having a storm down at their house.
Turn.
Yeah, we could just see the storm rolling up the hill.
It's just kind of rolling up the hill here.
Yeah,
the wind's blowing hard, and we just had a big bird hit the window. That was what we kind of all went like that.
Oh dear.
Okay.
We had a hailstorm push through right around probably around 9:30 this morning. We had a hailstorm push through.
Wow.
So.
Well, now
I am so ready for spring.
Here's the deal, guys. Now, next week we start looking about the notion of justice and compassion, and and so on within the context of the world's religions.
Yes.
And the question is, are Are we the only ones seeking justice and compassion? And if not, what does it look like if you're a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Muslim or whatever? So I think the conversation is going to expand and get a little exciting. At least I hope so. Okay.
So we're on to chapter 5 next week.
Right.
Chapter 5 next week. And I hope you enjoy reading it, because that's the part of the book I wrote.
Okay.
Well, I love the opening quote, Paul, because Oscar Romero is one of my favorites. It saddens me about how his life ended, but he did stand up for justice in a time and in a community that needed a voice, a mic of voice, and he paid with it with his life. But he was a wonderful man.
Yes, he was. And Rick and I both sort of found him simultaneously. We were sitting at Starbucks, drinking coffee, thinking about the book. And I said, this needs a bit of an introduction. And I said, and all of a sudden, Oscar Romero popped into my head. Just about the same time it did for Rick. So we looked it up, and found this quote together and slapped it on there. It's one of the best. It was almost like a mystical experience. So, yeah.
Paul, do you want to close us in prayer for the day? Before we didn't start with prayer, will you close us in prayer and send us on our way today and the next chapter?
Sure. Our Father, we thank you for this group, and we thank you for allowing us to strive for a just, compassionate, and harmonious communities in a process that never seems to end. And in that process, we learn lessons we would not have learned before, and we're grateful. May the people in this group find your love and grace. Amen.
Thank you, Paul.
Not very good at public prayer.
Thank you.